Good morning all. In this section we will be discussing about the static data members. Static data members are also known as the class variables, okay, and it is shared by all the objects of that class, okay, and that content does not depend on any object, and they have the one unique value for all the objects of that same class. Okay, so let's see an example of a static data member. Let's say I have a member which is in public section, static int employee sequence. Okay, static int employee sequence, and this emp underscore sequence, it will be same for all these objects. Okay, if you are refining emp sequence, emp1 dot emp sequence, emp2 dot emp sequence, emp3 dot emp sequence, it will produce the same result. I have implemented this emp sequence in any of these objects, this value will be updated and the latest value will be there for that emp sequence. Okay, let's see an example. Here in this case, in the class student, we have the student id st underscore id, and there is our static int id. Static int id, whenever I am mentioning static int id, it is not an object variable or object data member, it is a class variable. Okay, using the class we can access the that member. Okay, class variable student colon id refers to the same thing, this id. Okay, and this will be common to all the objects created by this student. Okay, so here what I have done is student s1 and s2. I have created two objects of type student. So what will happen whenever I am calling this, I am using this thing, what will happen, the default constructor, this one will be executed. So what I have done, stid, the student id is equal to plus id. What will happen here, what is the id I have already set as what, 0. Okay, student colon id is set as 0. So what will happen inside, the id will be 0 and the id will be incremented and becomes what, 1. Okay, that 1 will be assigned to stid. So s1's stid will become what, 1. Okay, again I have done what, student s2. So what will happen now, again what is the value of id now, 1. Okay, 1 is incremented and produces 2, and that 2 will be assigned as a student id here. Okay, so let's see the okay, after this what will happen to the s1 dot id or s2 dot id. s1 dot id, s2 dot id is a class variable and which is unique. So what is the value of id after creating two objects, it is 2. So s1 dot id will produce which results, can you guess it? Okay, it will produce what, 2. Okay, let us see the output. So here if you are seeing it, okay, the s1's stid is equal to what, 1, s2's stid is equal to 2. Okay, it's just printing what, the stid of that object. Okay, so I have assigned stid is equal to plus id. So whenever I am creating a new object of this type as student, this id will be incremented and it will be assigned to student id. Okay, so class variable value will be what, 2. Okay, it can also be accessed using what, complex colon id. Okay, so like the sorry, not complex, student colon id also we can access this one. Okay, let's say I have created one more thing, S3 also I have created. Now let's build it and execute it. Let's see what will be the output of this thing. So now can you see it? S1's stid is 1, S2's stid is 2, and what about the S3? I have created one more variable here, okay, one more object here. So what will happen? The id will be incremented, no? So what is the value of id now? It is 3, and that 3 is assigned to st underscore id, okay, s3 underscore id of s3, okay. So this will be unique even if I am calling it with s1.id, s2.id, s3.id. This will produce what? 3 only. I hope you understood this thing. Now like this, now we have seen the static data member, which is a class variable. Now we can see the static member functions. So we have seen the static data members, that is integers, floats, etc. And here we can see the member functions, and it is known as what? It will be declared with the static specifier. Okay, so before the declaration or the definition of this function, we will mention what? The static specifier. Okay, so these are the we can directly access the static members, and they does not have this pointer. Okay, inside this function we cannot, means it's not containing any of the object pointer. This pointer is pointing to the current object. So this static member function will not be using any current object pointer. Okay, they cannot be static and non-static version of the same function. Means what? We cannot create a same function with the static feature or non-static feature version. Means function overloading is not possible for the static one. Okay, and it must not be virtual. What is a virtual function and all we will see later. Finally, they cannot be declared as a constant or volatile. Let us see one scope resolution operator. How I have, if it is a